Welcome back to Horror Vault channel. Today I am going to reveal the complete story behind the murders happened at the Villisca White House. If you enjoy listening to such true horror stories, then do like and subscribe to Horror Vault. Okay, without any delay, let's start the story. The darkness that settled over Villisca, Iowa on the night of June 9, 1912, was no different from any other summer evening in America's heartland. The air hung heavy with humidity, fireflies pulsed their silent code across front lawns, and the streets gradually emptied as decent folk retired to their beds. In the two-story white frame house on the corner of 5th and East 2nd Street, the Moore family and their two young guests had returned from a Presbyterian church event, unaware they were living their final hours. By morning light, all 8 occupants would be dead, their skulls crushed by the sharp blade of an axe wielded with unimaginable fury. The killer would vanish into the mists of history, leaving behind a blood-soaked enigma that would haunt the American Midwest for generations to come. This is not merely a retelling of Iowa's most infamous unsolved crime. This is an excavation of evil, a journey into the heart of a darkness that refuses to recede even after more than a century has passed. Some stories refuse to die. Some violence echoes eternally. And sometimes the dead have more to say than the living are prepared to hear. The victims, 8 souls in repose. Josiah B. Moore, 43, a successful businessman who owned a farm implement store in town. Regarded as upstanding, hardworking, a pillar of the community. Sarah Montgomery Moore, 39, Josiah's wife. A devoted mother and active church member with a reputation for kindness. Herman Moore, 11, their eldest son. Described by teachers as bright and responsible. Mary Catherine Moore, 10, their only daughter. Known for her gentle nature and helping her mother with household duties. Arthur Moore, 7, their middle son. Energetic and well-liked by neighborhood children. Paul Moore, 5, the youngest Moore child. Still bearing the innocence of early childhood. Ina Stillinger, 8, daughter of Joe and Sarah Stillinger, invited to spend the night after a church event. Lena Stillinger, 12, Ina's older sister, accompanying her for the overnight stay at the Moore residence. 8 souls, each with dreams and futures abruptly terminated beneath the rising and falling of an axe blade that would never be caught or brought to justice. The discovery, morning's terrible revelation. Mary Peckham, the Moore's next-door neighbor, noticed something amiss on the morning of June 10th. The house stood silent. No smoke from the chimney, no movement behind windows, no children's voices carrying across the yard. The morning chores, always started promptly by Sarah Moore, remained undone. After knocking repeatedly with no response, Mary called Ross Moore, Josiah's brother. What they discovered upon entering would sear itself into their consciousness for the remainder of their lives. Ross Moore's statement to the Villisca Review newspaper, June 11, 1912. The sight that met my eyes is beyond description. My brother lay face down on his bed, his head crushed beyond recognition. The white sheets had turned crimson and the walls. God help me, the walls were spattered as though someone had flung paint across them. But it wasn't paint. The killer had moved methodically through the house. In each bedroom, the ceiling light fixture had been removed. Over each bed, a piece of clothing covered the victim's face. Mirrors throughout the house were draped with fabric. These peculiar rituals suggested premeditation rather than frenzied violence. Dr. J. Clark Cooper's official report described wounds consistent with the blunt side of an axe being used first to render the victims unconscious, followed by the sharp edge to deliver fatal blows. The physician's normally clinical language faltered when describing the children's wounds, noting only that the devastation was complete and merciless. Most disturbing to investigators was the evidence that the killer had not fled immediately. Food from the kitchen had been consumed. A basin of bloodied water suggested the murderer had washed before departing. The killer had lingered in the house of death, perhaps for hours, while Villisca slept unaware. The investigation, trails grown cold. The investigation that followed would prove to be a masterclass in how not to preserve a crime scene. By mid-morning on June 10th, the Moore house had become a macabre tourist attraction, with hundreds of citizens filing through to gawk at the blood-soaked rooms before authorities established proper containment. Sheriff Henry Horton arrived from the county seat to find critical evidence trampled, moved, or simply taken as souvenirs. Fingerprint analysis, still in its infancy as a forensic tool, was rendered impossible. Whatever clues the killer might have left behind vanished beneath the feet of the morbidly curious. Frank Jones, a state senator and business rival of Josiah Moore, quickly became a suspect. Their business relationship had soured years earlier when Moore left Jones' implement dealership to start his own competing store. Rumors of personal grievances between the men fueled speculation. Reverend George Kelly, a traveling preacher with a history of mental instability, had been in Villisca the night of the murders. He had attended the same church program as the Moores and Stillinger girls, and demonstrated an unhealthy fascination with the case in subsequent years. In 1917 he was twice tried for the murders after making a confession he later recanted, claiming it had been coerced. The first trial ended in a hung jury, the second resulted in acquittal. William Blackie Mansfield, a suspected serial killer, emerged as a compelling suspect when similar axe murders in Colorado, Illinois, and Kansas came to light. The pattern was strikingly similar: nighttime attacks, axe as the weapon, covering a victim's faces. Yet despite circumstantial connections, no definitive evidence linked him to Villisca. Detective James Wilkerson, hired by the victim's family, became convinced that Frank Jones had hired a killer named William Mansfield to murder Josiah Moore. This theory gained traction among many locals but failed to produce charges. By 1917, the investigation had stalled completely. The case files grew dusty, witnesses died, and the horror, while never forgotten, gradually receded into the realm of dark local legend. The Moore house stood as a silent monument to unspeakable violence, passing through various owners, none staying long. The hauntings, echoes that refused to fade. In 1994, Darwin and Martha Lynn purchased the Moore house with the intent of restoring it to its 1912 condition as a historical landmark. What they couldn't have anticipated was awakening something that had never truly slept. The restoration was meticulous: period furniture, authentic wallpaper patterns, even toys typical of the era placed in the children's rooms. But as workers stripped away decades of modifications, strange occurrences began to multiply. Martha Lynn, in a 2003 interview with Midwest Paranormal Quarterly. The first incident happened when our restoration carpenter was working alone in the children's bedroom upstairs. He heard children whispering behind him, laughing softly as though sharing secrets. When he turned around, the room was empty. He packed his tools and refused to return for 3 days. Reports accumulated: doors that had been locked found standing open, tools that disappeared only to reappear in different rooms, the sound of weeping emanating from empty spaces, cold spots so severe they caused breath to fog in midsummer heat. When the house opened for tours in 1998, the experiences extended to visitors. Cameras would malfunction only inside the property boundaries, batteries would drain inexplicably, and some guests reported feeling physically ill upon entering certain rooms, particularly the parents' bedroom where Josiah and Sarah Moore had been killed. Paranormal investigation teams flocked to the site. Their equipment recorded anomalous temperature fluctuations, electromagnetic disturbances, and in several instances, audio recordings captured what appeared to be children's voices where no children were present. A digital EVP, electronic voice phenomenon, recording captured April 18, 2005, by the Midwestern Paranormal Research Society contains what many believe to be a child's voice saying clearly, "He's still here. Don't sleep." The overnight stays, courting darkness. In 2008, the Lynns began allowing overnight stays in the murder house, an experience not for the faint of heart. Visitors would spend from dusk until dawn in the very rooms where the murders occurred, often using the same beds, though with modern mattresses. These overnight experiences have produced the most compelling accounts of paranormal activity. Common reports include the sound of children running up and down the stairs at approximately 2 a.m., the sensation of being touched by invisible hands, particularly in the children's bedroom, objects moving without human intervention, the sound of an axe striking wood coming from the attic, shadowy figures glimpsed at the foot of beds or in doorways. Michael Tallman, paranormal author who stayed overnight in 2011. I've investigated 43 allegedly haunted locations across America. Nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to what I experienced in the Moore house. At 3:17 a.m., the temperature in the children's bedroom dropped nearly 20 degrees in seconds. Our equipment registered electromagnetic spikes off the charts. And then we all heard it, the unmistakable sound of children giggling, followed by what I can only describe as a man's voice whispering. None of us slept another minute that night. The incident, violence renewed. On November 7, 2014, the house's dark reputation took a disturbing turn when Robert Larson Jr., a 37-year-old visitor from Wisconsin, was participating in a recreational overnight paranormal investigation. At approximately 12:45 a.m., in circumstances that remain unclear, Larson stabbed himself repeatedly in the chest with a 4-inch pocket knife. Emergency responders found him conscious but in critical condition. He offered no explanation for his actions, and friends participating in the ghost hunt reported that he had shown no signs of distress or unusual behavior prior to the incident. Larson survived but has never publicly discussed what prompted his self-attack. Rumors spread quickly through the paranormal community. Possession, psychic suggestion, or a momentary psychosis triggered by the house's oppressive atmosphere. Sheriff Sonny Dugan's official statement was terse. "We have no reason to believe foul play was involved. This appears to be a self-inflicted injury for reasons unknown." The incident only enhanced the house's reputation as a locus of malevolent energy, drawing even more thrill-seekers and paranormal enthusiasts to Villisca. The theories, beyond conventional explanation. As decades passed without resolution to the murders, theories expanded beyond the conventional suspects to explanations that defied rational analysis. Dr. Eleanor Matheson, parapsychologist who conducted a 6-month study of the property in 2007 to 2008. "What we're witnessing in the Moore house represents a perfect storm of traumatic energy imprinting itself on physical space. The violent nature of the deaths, the innocence of the victims, particularly the children, and the lack of resolution or justice. These factors create what I term a psychic wound in the location. It's as though the very walls have absorbed the terror and pain of that night, replaying it in fragments for those sensitive enough to perceive it." Some locals subscribe to more traditional supernatural explanations. Margaret Wilkinson, 93, whose grandmother lived in Villisca at the time of the murders. "My grandma took to her grave the belief that what happened in that house wasn't entirely human work. She said people in town had reported seeing a strange, tall figure walking the streets nights before the killings. Not a regular man, she said, but something wearing the shape of a man like ill-fitting clothes. After the murders, that figure was never seen again. Draw your own conclusions." Perhaps most disturbing are accounts from overnight guests who claim to have experienced lost time, periods of the night for which they have no memory. Some report waking to find themselves in different rooms than where they fell asleep, with no recollection of moving. Jason Richards, paranormal blogger who stayed overnight in 2016. "I fell asleep around 1 a.m. in the living room. I woke standing in the parents' bedroom at 3:33 a.m., my right hand raised above my head as though holding something. My 3 friends were still asleep downstairs. I have no memory of climbing the stairs or entering the room. The terror I felt in that moment exceeds anything I've ever experienced." The legacy, darkness preserved. Today, the Villisca Axe Murder House stands as one of America's most notorious haunted locations. Tours run daily from April through October, with overnight stays booked months in advance despite the $428 nightly fee. The house has been featured on countless paranormal television programs. Ghost hunters arrive equipped with increasingly sophisticated equipment, yet the fundamental questions remain unanswered. Who committed the murders, and why does the violence of that night continue to reverberate through time? Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the Villisca case is the possibility that the killer lived out a full life, perhaps even remained in the community, taking their secrets to the grave. Census records indicate that several residents who lived within blocks of the Moore house in 1912 remained in Villisca until their deaths decades later. Did one of them harbor the darkest secret in Iowa history? The killings changed Villisca forever. A town that never locked its doors became a community of suspicion and fear. Neighbors eyed neighbors with new wariness. Children were no longer allowed to roam freely. The innocence of rural America had been shattered by 8 swings of an axe. Epilogue: The Endless Night. As I conclude this account, sitting at my desk with dozens of interview transcripts, historical documents, and paranormal investigation reports spread before me, I'm struck by a singular thought. The night of June 9th to 10th, 1912, never truly ended in the house on the corner of 5th and East 2nd Street. For the souls of Josiah, Sarah, Herman, Mary Catherine, Arthur, Paul, Ina, and Lena, time stopped at the moment of their violent deaths. And perhaps that's what visitors sense when they walk through those rooms, not just echoes of the past, but a bubble in time where June 9th repeats endlessly, where the killer always lurks upstairs waiting for the family to return from the church program, where the axe is always poised to fall. My own visit to the house last autumn left me with an experience I've been reluctant to share until now. Standing in the children's bedroom as dusk approached, I distinctly heard a child's voice, a little girl I believe, whisper directly behind my right ear. "He comes back every night. Always with the axe." When I turned, of course no one was there. But the cold spot where the voice had originated remained for several minutes, a pocket of December air in an otherwise warm September room. I don't pretend to know what happened in Villisca that night in 1912. I don't claim to understand the mechanics of how trauma might imprint itself on physical space. But I do know this: 8 people had their lives violently stolen, and something of that violence remains active and aware in the house where they died. The mystery of who wielded the axe may never be solved. But perhaps that's not the question that matters most anymore. Perhaps what we should be asking is, where do murdered souls go when justice fails them? The answer, it seems, is nowhere at all. They remain, waiting for an accounting that never comes, trapped in an endless night of terror where the killer always approaches and the axe always falls. And sometimes, when the veil between then and now grows thin, they reach out to the living, not for comfort or connection, but to pull us momentarily into their eternal nightmare, to make us witnesses to a horror that refuses to fade into history. In Villisca, the past isn't dead. It isn't even past. It's waiting upstairs in the dark, axe in hand, listening for footsteps on the stairs. And that's the end of this story. Who could perform such a heinous crime without any conscience? Do let us know your opinion about the real killer behind these murders. And as always, if you like exploring the details about such true horror stories, then do like and subscribe to Horror Vault channel. I will see you in the next video.